CNBC reported, based off of the IRS data, that New York and California as states lost over $90 billion in income taxes to low tax states during COVID. So I'm just going to read a few key points that the article says. New York and California lost over $90 billion in income during COVID, according to the new IRS data. It accelerated the trend of high earners relocating to lower tax states like Florida and Texas. The income losses for California and New York in 2021 were more than 3 times their combined losses in 2019 before the pandemic took hold in the US. So the numbers of the battles between states and how to handle it are finally coming in. And not to dunk on him again, but as Trump is trying to paint this picture that Florida did worse than COVID with COVID deaths, the data of the economics is coming out, and it's 90 billion that they lost because they locked down harder.
Yeah, it's tough to argue that, Florida did a worse job than California or New York. I know that, Trump's been saying that and Newsom's been running around trying to dunk on DeSantis, but people put their money where their mouth is and have been moving. My family, when COVID hit, you feel like, oh, we can't see anyone. We live in Tennessee, and we were thinking of moving. I'm from New York. My wife's from California, and we were like, oh, maybe we should move closer to where we have family. And quickly realized we weren't going to be allowed to almost exist in either of those states. If we go to New York, for quite a while, we wouldn't have been able to go to a restaurant. We wouldn't be able to take part in, regular things without your vaccine card, So, and then Tennessee opened up pretty quick. So it was very different at the time living here. And then I was still going to LA to do some work in early 2021. And it was like a war zone out there, people driving alone in their cars with masks on. But back here, everybody's out eating dinner, going to bars, going about their business. It was just 2 completely different scenarios happening, depending on who was in charge of the state. And it was just really kind of sad and depressing to see what was happening in California while people were just kind of living their lives and going about their business here in Tennessee.
Yeah, and I think this is some actually optimistic and good news. I mean, I'm not trying to dunk on 2 complete states and be like, haha, you're losing money, but
Right.
really they deserve it because, I moved from LA County to a conservative county during COVID. I was like, I can't live here. Why would I did a show, I did Sturgis in 2020 in South Dakota, and it was completely open. And then when I got back to California, it's like, why do I even live in this state? I was considering moving there somewhere open because it's just totally different planets. But the fact that they lost so much money, this will speak to their policy. And although they're gaslighting for elections and legacy purposes, I think they see the type of economic damage they did to their state. And we've always said this, and some conservatives, at least, or libertarians, have always said, you can raise taxes on the wealthy in your state. It's an interesting concept, right? As somebody that doesn't have $1 billion to say, hey, we're going to tax you 90, 80% or whatever. But they don't have to, not only do they not have to stay in the state, they don't have to stay in the country. So, you want to do a balance of, you don't want to chase all the wealthy people and corporations away, because then who's there left to take the money? It's going to be the lower class and the middle class. And that's one thing I found when I remember I liked Bernie against Hillary, and he was talking about healthcare. And I'm like, and then I realized in California that they forced me to buy healthcare that I didn't want, and I had no money, and it was like $4,000, $5,000 a year, which was a lot for me. And I was like, wait, why am I paying for this? I thought it was free. And that's where kind of the concept boils down, is people don't have to stay in the States, and they didn't, and they lost $90 billion.
Yeah, I mean, people just decided I don't want to be here anymore. We had an influx of, because Nashville is a very big touristy town, people come here to party. And even through the summer of 2021, you keep talking to people coming through town, and they're like, show up with their mask on, and they're looking for permission to, and it's like, no, you don't have to do that here. Like, you get to enjoy themselves. And by the end of the weekend, they're just having the best time. And they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to go back to where I've got a mask up and everybody's afraid and nobody goes out. And I think a lot of people were like, yeah, like you said, you went to Sturgis, and then when you get back to California, you're like, this doesn't feel right at all. Like, I don't
Right.
want to live like this. And I think when people were traveling again, it opened their eyes. When you went back to a state that was still pretty locked down, you realize that that wasn't a good way of life. That wasn't how you wanted to be. And you start considering maybe getting out.
And I think that this kind of shows 2 things. One, state competition where, because of Florida, South Dakota, Georgia, that were opening and taking a lot of the money, taking a lot of the travel, the tourism, as much as Gavin Newsom and Cuomo and people like that were talking, they could see their bank accounts. They could see the fact that people are leaving their state. It's miserable to live like that. They know that deep down in their hearts. So I think that this shows that one, over time, the truth was told. And also, I hate to go back on this because I know people are like, you harp on this all the time, but I do think it's very relevant. Every time I talk to somebody that tries to make excuses for what Republicans did and how they were in on it for too long, they say maybe Trump rushed the vaccine to save us from a 10-year lockdown. Not only is that like psychotic, just like making up some fake excuse because you can't fathom that both parties are corrupt, but also it's like when you see how much money New York and California were losing, you think even they wouldn't have even stayed locked down for 10 years. They couldn't afford to because of the open states. So not only would New York and California not have locked down for that long, but this idea that Republicans would have stayed locked down for 10 years unless a vaccine, I think that's one of the fakest theories that people have been regurgitating. And I think it also kind of helps the other side because if you're, as a libertarian, a freedom fighter, conservative, patriot, even an honest leftist, whatever you consider yourself, if you're like, my freedom is in exchange for a vaccine, or that's the only way I can get my things back, then the government's going to keep putting the carrot in front of your face. They're like, even the right thinks that they need something to get their freedom back. Shouldn't the stance be just don't give it up and draw the line?
Well, that's where we should have been starting, but that was the major problem with COVID was we've stirred everybody up with this fear, and everybody is stuck in their homes and glued to their TVs and be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. And then it's like, well, how do we unring that bell and get people to want to go back out and go to concerts and go to the movies and go out to restaurants? And in the process, we destroyed so many small businesses who were forced to close and stay closed, but Walmart could stay open, Costco could stay open. Home Depot was open. So all of these big stores, Amazon, everybody is profiting like crazy because all their competition is shut down. And, the margins on a small business are so small that you can't stay closed very long and still stay in business at all and stay open. So the amount of businesses that closed, like we still haven't recovered from that. There's still the restaurant industry is still clawing their way back. And then now with inflation and everything going through the roof, I don't know how a lot of these places are surviving, but Amazon did fine, Home Depot did fine, Walmart did fine, but we just put everybody in this state of fear and then couldn't figure out how to get them back out of it. So yeah, you dangle the carrot of, oh, if everyone just gets this vaccine or everyone, just gets on board with this, but then you're incrementally giving up even more rights and saying, well, we'll give them back, you're asking for permission to have them back, but they're your rights. You didn't have to give them up in the first place, and you don't need their permission to take them back.
And I noticed that the front runner for the Democratic Party, Joe Biden, and the front runner for the Republican Party, Donald Trump, they're both trying to gaslight people into thinking that 2020 and COVID's not really an issue because he ran on I'll fix it or whatever, and then Trump obviously doesn't really, that's not his strong point. So he doesn't want to kind of relive it. But when you're talking about the fallout of restaurants, what we're facing, all of the abuses that happen as far as psychologically, the kids out of school, like this stuff's going to linger for the next 30, 40 years. And if we never forget 9/11, then we never have to. And I'm not trying to compare events because they're tragic in different ways, but there's no way that just because you like Donald Trump, you're just going to magically forget about COVID. And that's not going to be part of the 2024 campaign because he doesn't want to talk about it. And DeSantis and RFK does. I'm not buying this. Let's just forget about it because it's not a main issue. All these lingering issues that our country faces economically, even foreign policy, you best believe that, one of these countries saw an end because of the weakness that was going on around the world with lockdowns and economic shifts. I wanted to say thank you, Ira, for the stars on Facebook. I saw it. YouTube subscribers, it's going to be subscribers only commenting for like the first half. I'll open it at the end. And yeah, we're going to move on, but I want to let you get a word in there. Like the gaslighting where it's like, oh, this is not a big issue. Like, let's just forget about that because voters don't care about it. Maybe not all,
Well,
but I do. And I know you do.
I know a lot of people that still care about this, and it seems to be the only people that don't want to talk about it anymore are the ones that were pushing for lockdowns and pushing for mandates and screaming at people to get in line and marginalizing and dehumanizing the people who wouldn't. And now that that's been proven spectacularly wrong, those people would like to kind of just whistle past the graveyard and not talk about it anymore. And to me, if we can't have an acknowledgement that things were handled poorly and we can't have an atonement for the way that things went down, it's just going to happen again. They're just going to pull out the same playbook. I mean, you can look back to the opioid crisis where they talked to, said, oh, they're not addictive. The FDA got on board saying they're not addictive. Doctors said, "Oh, it's not addictive." And then when people were like, "Hey, I'm in pain again," and then their prescription was, "Oh, you just need more. You've got breakthrough pain." I don't know if you ever saw the series Dope Sick. It's all about opioids, and they talk about breakthrough pain. What happened when they roll out the vaccine, but vaccinated people start getting sick? Oh, those are breakthrough cases. Like they don't even change the lingo, pharma. They just slap it back on the newest thing that they're pushing and keep barreling forward and marginalize anybody who won't get on board. So I do think that RFK and DeSantis and other candidates that still want to keep this as part of the election, they should, because it's the biggest thing that's happened in the last 5 years, certainly, and the ramifications of the lockdowns and the mandates, we're just starting to learn the effects of them, the effects on kids in school, the effects on depression and, drug use and alcoholism and loneliness. Like people lost connection with humanity for years, and it's hard to come back from. So I am glad that there are people keeping the conversation going because it can't just be swept under the rug and move along like nothing happened.